Sexual harassment is defined in the Equality Act 2010, and it's unwanted physical, verbal or non-verbal conduct of a sexual nature that has the purpose or effect of violating a person's dignity at work or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating or offensive environment for them. It can be a single incident, it can be somebody refusing or accepting advances of a sexual nature, it can also be somebody that's not the intended victim of it as well. From the 26th of October 2024, all employers are now under a legal duty to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. This means it's a big change for employers, it's a much broader duty, they can't just react to changes, they had to actually proactively try and stop it happening in the first place. Well, it would be helpful if an employer had a checklist of things they could do to prevent it happening. There isn't quite that. Basically, the Equality and Human Rights Commission has produced a really helpful 8-step guide, and the big change for employers now is that really they need to take out and carry out risk assessments to identify the risk of sexual harassment happening in the workplace and how to reduce that risk. So we had hoped the Equality and Human Rights Commission would produce a template risk assessment, but in reality we all knew that would be difficult because every sector is different, every employer is different, so there is no one size fits all. So it's really incumbent on employers to think about each situation and scenario and think about what steps they can take to actually reduce the risk of sexual harassment happening to their workers. The big question is, how does the new duty impact on Christmas parties? Does this mean there'll be no more Christmas parties? Well, hopefully not. I'm sure there will be a few employers who are nervous about any potential incidents happening at the party, so they may stop them, but the reality is parties will continue, but employers are required to take a much more proactive approach in planning that to make sure they reduce the risk of harassment. So for a Christmas party coming up, at the very least, you need to remind staff that this is an extension of the workplace. They are going to still be held accountable for their conduct, and if they fall below a particular level, or if they harass people, or if they have a fight, that could result in disciplinary action against them. So it's really important employees and managers and staff all realise this is still the workplace. That can be done by issuing a memo, by sending out copies of policies and procedures like your disciplinary, your anti-harassment, but that all needs to happen. It should also be included as part of annual half-year training sessions as well. Specifically for the Christmas party, you really need to think about where the party is going to take place. So let's think about travel. If your party is in a brilliant monastery in the middle of nowhere and it's going to finish at 2 o'clock in the morning, how are people going to get home? So do you need to put on buses to take them back to the city centre? Do you need to arrange taxis? If not, do you need to make sure that people are buddied up with people? So it's thinking about the location, thinking about perhaps individual people getting home on their own. How will that work? The big issue, I suppose, as well for Christmas parties, the elephant in the room is alcohol. Are we going to allow it? I think most Christmas parties do, but I think you will be judged as an employer about what your approach to that is. If you have a free bar with unlimited shots, tequila slammers, I think perhaps that might not be a great way to show that you're taking preventative steps to stop harassment in the workplace. But if you perhaps limit drinks and say, well, you can only have 2 drinks while you're here, but also reminding staff we still expect you to act appropriately. Secondly, from a health and safety perspective, is what happens to, there's always one, what happens to the employee that gets really, really drunk and needs to go home early? Do we have emergency contact details for them? Do we know where they're staying that night? Do we know who to call their parents, their partner to come and collect them? Do we have somebody who's going to be sort of sufficiently sober to do that? So again, identifying a manager perhaps who could be the person who is on watch that night, who's there in a sort of duty of care capacity, who will actually have those details and make that call if needed. You definitely need somebody who is not quite as drunk as everybody else at these parties. You might also look at wider things, like if you have a WhatsApp group for work, it's really easy for people to take photos at these events, and they seem great at the time, but they could be really offensive for somebody. Remember, sexual harassment is how it's received by the individual. It might not be intended to be harassment. So you might, if you're the admin person for a workplace WhatsApp group, you might actually restrict access so people cannot put photos on there for about 3 or 4 days, just to avoid the risk of anyone actually seeing that happen. And the other thing as well from an employer's perspective is make it clear when the party ends. If there's an after party and it's deemed to be an extension of the workplace, you could still be liable. So make it really, really clear in all communications, the party ends at 12 o'clock, everyone's expected to go home, and then if people do go off somewhere else, hopefully that should mean it's not on your watch.